Good morning and welcome to another weekly live session of Coastal Drone Weekly Live. My name's Ian, I've got Jen, and I've got Finn. We're drone experts, pilots, and educators in the drone space. This week we're going to be talking about what's the deal with micro drones, and we're going to go through dispelling some myths, giving you some facts, and outlining what you can and can't do with everyone's favorite sub 250 gram drone. Drones in Canada that are under 250 grams are categorized as micro drones. These drones are in a special category, and it's especially important for us in Canada because we have a set of rules that allow us to do it. So today, like we said, we're going to talk about what are micro drones, what are the rules, what is out there on the market that we would recommend if you're looking to buy your first drone or micro drone, and then we'll open it up for questions and answers from the audience.
A micro drone is simply any RPAS, so remotely piloted aircraft system, that weighs between 0 and 249 grams.
And is this only multi-rotor?
Any RPAS that is 0 to 249 grams. I'm not aware of any micro drones that are not multi-rotor. Maybe if you bought a model airplane that used a foam wing, that would be under 250.
Totally.
But at a consumer level, a micro drone would be something normally like a quadcopter that is 249 grams or less. So the weight is the takeoff weight of the aircraft. Does not include the controller, but it includes if you put anything onto the aircraft. So a lot of the DJI products, they come with a larger battery. You put the larger battery in, it is no longer a micro drone. I had someone for a flight review come in, and he actually had a wrap on his micro drone, and that wrap actually put it above the micro drone category. No longer a micro drone. The minis don't have a swappable gimbal. If they had a swappable gimbal and I put on one that was very heavy, then that would no longer be a micro drone.
That's a Mini 1, or a Mavic Mini as it was originally called. It was 249 grams with the battery, with the propellers, with the memory card. It was like 248.5 without a memory card. So right exactly at the 249 gram limit. I have ND filters for that one, and I weighed it even with. And again, like kitchen scale, if it weighs more than 249 grams, it is no longer a micro drone. And then what happens if it's over? You need
a certificate. It needs to be registered.
Yeah. So we're back into the small drone category, which is 250 grams all the way up to 25 kilograms in Canada. Now, for American audience, let's take a step back and talk about what's the main difference between Canada and the US when it comes to micro drones?
The big difference is that Canada has the micro drone category kind of at all.
Yeah, exactly. So in the States, there is still micro drones. They call them UAS, or small UAS, unmanned aerial systems, up to 0.55 pounds or 249 grams. Most of the drone rules apply to sub 0.55 pound UASs. The only difference is the micro drone category in the States, you do not need to register the drone. But now you have to have a trust certificate, which is loosely the same as what our basic is up in Canada. And you must, if you're doing commercial operations, you need a Part 107, even for a micro drone in the United States.
And I can't remember, does it need the remote ID for the micro drone?
Yeah, so there's different categories. And in order to be exempt, it has to, if it needs to be a Category 1 drone, it has to be under 250 grams with prop guards. So if you threw prop guards on the Mini 1, 2, 3, 4, it's like 260 grams. So you would be over, and it wouldn't qualify for Category 1.
Yeah, and if in the regulations for remote ID, it's any drone that requires registration requires remote ID. So if you're exempt for the registration, no remote ID required.
Exactly. So there is some wiggle room in that side. But you still need to have, the pilot needs to have some sort of knowledge proof. So a trust or a Part 107. In Canada, no license required, no registration required, no training required, right? It's pretty wide open when it comes to micro drone operations in Canada. So anyone off the street can fly a micro drone today, right now. You can go to the store and buy one. You can take off and fly. Real question, though, is where can you fly? Let's talk about the golden rule. What's the golden rule, Jen?
Don't be an idiot.
Yeah. Summarized, paraphrased. That's it.
That's straight out of Cars.
Yeah. I'll give you the verbatim one. It's no person shall operate a remotely piloted aircraft system in such a reckless or negligent manner as to endanger or be likely to endanger aviation safety or the safety of any person. So what it really means is don't fly near airplanes. Don't fly near people. Don't put yourself in a position where you're going to be a hazard, be a risk, right? We've already mentioned this, but like I said, pilots of micro drones don't need to register the drone or get a drone pilot certificate. Pilots of drones aren't bound by the same requirements. They're not hard and fast black and white rules. They are a list of suggestions. The expectation is that a pilot of a micro drone is going to use good judgment, identify potential hazards, and take all necessary steps to avoid any risks associated with flying your drone. Can you use a micro drone on a flight review?
Yes, asterisk. The requirements for a drone, there are only 2 requirements for a drone for a flight review. They need to be over 250 grams and registered. Those are the only 2 requirements. So, out of the box, not over 250 grams.
249.
Not registered. As we mentioned before, a lot of these come with bigger batteries. You pop a bigger battery into that aircraft and then register it, it is now eligible for the flight review.
And we should qualify bigger batteries. It's going to apply to the Mini 3 and up. So the Mini 3, Mini 3 Pro, and the Mini 4, there's 2 different versions of batteries that you can get. These are the Intelligent Flight sub 249 gram batteries, and they actually say on the battery at the top, ultralight, 249 gram. If it doesn't say this on the battery, then the battery itself is the bigger one. It's got more cells in it. Once you put this into the drone then weighs 290 grams. So it's no longer a micro. Change the battery, you've got a drone that requires a basic or an advanced, and it has to be registered. So
that's what normally, if someone is using Mini 3 on the flight review is probably the most common drone, Mini 3 with the bigger battery. Other things you can do, so if it's something like this that doesn't come with a bigger battery, set of prop guards, you can 3D print some landing gear, something like that, or even just a fixed weight.
You can modify the drone to increase its total takeoff weight. The hazards of modifying a drone is that going to negatively impact the way the drone flies?
Here at our office, it's in Class G airspace. If you're only the Mini 3, Mini 3 Pro, and Mini 4 have a safety assurance declaration.
While the bigger battery is installed.
At all. So if you add weight to a Mini 2, it is eligible for the flight review as long as that flight review is not in controlled airspace.
Exactly. Yeah. So if you wanted to, say you lived in Class C, first off, you'd need to register the drone. You'd then need to get permission from NAV Canada to fly the drone. One of the big components is the drone has to have on your certificate of registration, there's 3 checkboxes, the over people, near people, and controlled airspace checkbox. That controlled airspace checkbox is a declaration by the manufacturer of the drone that the drone is certified as safe or tested as safe to fly and meets the minimum requirements of flying controlled airspace. By gluing a Lego brick or something else to your drone, or even putting prop guards on the Mini 2 and 1, those prop guards are meant for indoor flying. They're not meant for outdoor flying. So the drone was not tested to fly outdoors with those props. And what happens in reality is with the Mini 2, the Mini 1, the SE, all that, it goes into something called payload mode, and it actually limits the performance of the drone, and it limits the range and altitude that it'll fly. So the drone recognizes that something's not right. It doesn't know that it has prop guards on it, but it knows that it's working harder to maintain that hover because the weight of the aircraft is significantly increased.
Sorry, so would the safety declaration then be void?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So what happens is there is no declaration for micro drones because no declaration is required. It's kind of a chicken and egg thing. But DJI offers these guys with bigger batteries, so they've made a declaration with the bigger battery. The problem is when they describe the declaration on the Choosing the Right Drone site, they just called it a Mini 3 Pro. They don't say it's the Mini 3 Pro with the Fly More Plus battery. One of our podcast episodes even goes right into declarations in general. As soon as you modify something, you own it. You are now the manufacturer or the modifier of that drone. So then you have to go through the paperwork to declare that drone to be qualified to do it. So all that aside, can you use a Mini on a flight review? Yes, as long as it's registered over 250 grams, right? Exactly. And then subject to the safety assurance declaration requirements for your review. So if you're doing a review in controlled airspace, needs that. If you're doing it in a busy area where there's a lot of bystanders, you might need up to 16 feet.
If you're doing it at our office in Langley, you don't need any of that.
We've talked about this. And there's the prop guards. This was for the Mini 2 and the Mini 1 series. Now we're going to kind of go through some yes and no's, and I want to discuss some common myths about where you can and can't fly micro drones. So now we've done the flight review side. Let's ignore all that. We're back to everything we're going to talk about from now forward is for drones that weigh 249 grams or less. Can you fly a micro drone over people? Yes, but you shouldn't is the right answer. And this is really what it's going to be. So we've got it. You might have seen it on our social, and we'll link it in the description of this below. But we have a quick reference card for micro and for small as well. But basically everything we're saying here is yes, but, or a hard no. Right? So the stuff that's on the right side is a hard no. There is no gray area about it. It's black and white. On the left side is yes, but let's respect with CARS 900-06, the don't be an idiot rule.
Any controlled airspace you can fly in, though Class A airspace starts at 18,000 feet. I don't know if this thing's getting to 18,000 feet.
Yeah, so actually that's a good point. You should not disregard the flight manual. Even though it's a CARS 901 rule, was it 90131? Yeah, like don't ignore the instructions in the owner's manual. You shouldn't, right? You're asking too much of the drone, so then you're going back to negligence and reckless. So if you fly at 18,000 feet with a drone that's only rated for 12, then that's a problem.
But yes, any controlled airspace, so A, B, C, D, E, all good to go.
And really what we're looking at, though, in all these categories of airspace, so this is airspace that's surrounding usually airports, right? So controlled airspace is going to be surrounding busier airports like Vancouver, Abbotsford, Montreal, Toronto, Winnipeg. These are control zones and controlled airspace. Surrounding other types of airports or aerodromes like Chilliwack or Hope or that's what I'm going to go to is it's uncontrolled airspace. So it's Class G airspace. You still shouldn't fly directly surrounding them. And there is going to be tools in place potentially to stop you from flying around those using the DJI Fly Safe unlock system. 2 weeks ago, we talked about this at length, so I'm not going to go more into it. You should check that out. But there is a geofencing system built into DJI drones that will stop you from flying in areas that are higher risk. This is not the laws. This is not where you can and can't fly. And we're going to get into that more in a bit here. But it's important to know that controlled airspace by default with a micro drone is okay. What about beyond line of sight?
Again, yes, but it's not the best practice to fly beyond line of sight for prolonged periods of time.
What is beyond line of sight? What is line of sight?
Eyes on the aircraft. Either the person at the controls or someone who has direct communication with the person at the controls has line of sight on the can see the aircraft, physically see the aircraft and the area around it to detect obstacles.
Yeah, so most importantly, it's the detect and avoid, right? Being able to scan the area around where you're flying the drone and know for sure whether or not there is potential airplanes or helicopters in the area. Because it's a micro drone, you're not necessarily going to see it perfectly line of sight, even at 500 meters away. It's going to be difficult to tell what direction it's going, what altitude, what speed, everything else it is. So it's more about, I can see where the drone is, I can see around the drone, I can tell that the drone's not going to hit something, and I can also tell that there's no airplanes or helicopters in the area.
You're allowed to glance at your controller.
There is an understanding that you're going to be looking at your controller because that's where your telemetry is. That's where everything is for the drone. These things are intended to be operated by a single person. It's not like they're multi-crew drones. So taking your eyes off the drone to look at your telemetry, as long as you have a scan technique and you're thinking about your situational awareness, then it's not a big deal.
Now, if you need to stare at the controller for 10 straight minutes, then I would consider that not line of sight.
Yeah, if you're totally heads down and you have no idea what's going around, or another big thing like we talk about when you're doing professional stuff, if it's a noisy environment, you're going to lose that situational awareness. If you can't hear an airplane or a helicopter coming, if you can't hear someone talking to you, if you're wearing ear protection or something like that, you should have a visual observer and maybe have them in like an earbud or something so that they're able to talk to you and give you a heads up of traffic that's coming. What are the rules for flying a drone indoors? Absolutely zilch. So there is no drone laws at all when it comes to indoor flying. It is not regulated. It is not in the purview of Transport Canada at all. So you can fly your micro drone all day long indoors. Indoors is surrounded by at least 3 walls. So it needs to be basically surrounded by a roof and a few walls. There is no limitation to it. It's a good idea to run prop guards because you're probably going to bounce it off a wall at some point. You're likely to not have GPS, so auto hold positioning is not going to work. It's going to rely entirely on any kind of vision-based positioning. And this is generic. Most DJI stuff now has vision-based positioning, which is when you look at the bottom of a drone, there's 2 cameras on the bottom of it. That's the Mini 1. It also has that. It's a very rudimentary system on the Mini 1. This one's a little better, of course. They keep getting better over time. But in a dark environment indoors, it's going to suck pretty bad. Over polished floors, really bad. So anything that's reflective, right? There's no GPS at that point. It's just purely looking at, did the point on the ground that I'm looking at move left or right? Well, maybe I should move in the opposite direction to hold myself over that position. Over 400 feet.
Yeah, but you're never going to see the drone over 400 feet.
So this is one that is, yes, you can, but should you? Right? And this is, again, the same on the left side of everything. The standard drone rule in cross-Canada for bigger drones is 0 to 400 feet above ground. There are exceptions that you can fly when you're closer to buildings. You can fly up to 100 feet above that building, only in uncontrolled, right, Class G airspace. If you're in controlled airspace, you might have to fly lower because now you're prevented by the airspace controller. So ATS or air traffic services will tell you how high you can fly. But with micros, if I wanted to fly at 700 feet to get a shot, as long as A, you can see the area, B, have a reasonable amount of line of sight, again, because line of sight is variable on micros, you can do that. I have taken this specific drone to 1,600 feet above ground to capture a very, very large building that we wanted all of the building in one photo. And the only way to do it with the lens that was on this was to fly up to 1,600 feet. How did I do it? I was in Class G uncontrolled airspace. I stood there for about 10 minutes staring at the sky to get an assessment of what was going on for air traffic and where they were typically flying. I had an air traffic app like FlightAware, which is only partially good in Canada, just to be clear, and basically just stood there and listened. And it was a quiet enough area that I was comfortable with it. And then I set the drone up to go up. And I knew that the reality was this shot was important. It was a paid shot. But the only way I could do it safely was accept the fact that if I couldn't avoid an airplane or a helicopter coming, if it was getting to the point where they were perceptually below me, I would have to basically abandon the flight and shut the drone down because these things take forever to descend. And that's the biggest hazard. If you climb up to 1,000 feet, the maximum descent rate of these things is somewhere around 5 to 8 meters per second, which is 16 to 17 kilometers an hour or something like that. So it's not very fast. And dealing with an airplane that's probably closing at 100 knots or more, so you can't outrun an airplane or a helicopter. So you do not want to be in that space. It's super high risk. You need to be able to justify it and mitigate all those risks. So it's legal, but again, is it something that you should do in a routine? Probably not. Advertised events. This is one that is the most visible and the most that I would say you should not do. It's very high risk. It's very public, and perceptually, it's not the best. You can do it. So you can fly over an advertised event with a micro drone. If you were to fly anything bigger, you'd have to have a special flight operations certificate. It's not even allowed routinely for normal sized drones. So we're talking about a 1 gram difference that makes it legal to fly this over a slightly bigger drone. So if it's not legal for a 250 gram drone, it's that 1 gram isn't really going to make a big difference practically. What are we talking about here? We're talking about anything that's within 100 feet distance of a publicly advertised event. So rock concert, golfing tournament, hockey games that are open air, car shows, community fairs, community markets.
Fireworks events.
There's a double whammy with fireworks events. There's usually a NOTAM that comes in place with a restricted airspace, the CYR. So you got to watch out for that. Any air shows, right? Again, there's going to be a CYR. Any public gatherings, charity rides, motorcycle gatherings. I've seen a few of those pop up on Facebook where they're like, can someone bring a drone and capture us doing this? Well, yes, but only if it's a micro and only in this circumstance. And I'll tell you that I've done it with micros. I've gone to like car shows and gatherings of friends, and it's like, I talk to the organizer. I'm like, hey, do you mind if I get a couple drone shots? Sure, no problem. They don't know anything about the rules, but I do. And it's legal what I'm doing. But at the same time, it's really, there's a lot of people around. There's a lot of kids around. Like, do you want to be doing this in that circumstance? So what I would do is I'd go back to that 100-foot perimeter rule and fly the micro around the event, not directly over top of it, not in a situation where I could potentially like be heads down, snag a power line, or because you're not necessarily going to have a full site survey done if it's a big event like that. It's not something I would say is the best. Any drone you can fly at night. Micro drones you can fly at night. There is a sufficient lighting requirement for larger drones. I would say the lighting on the Mini 3s and the Mini 2s is not great. It's not something that you'd want to fly very far because it doesn't really have that sufficient lighting that you should have for night operations. There's no beacon or strobe. There's no downward facing landing light, so the landing accuracy is not going to be great. The Mini 3 only has arm lights on the side. There are these tiny little beacons here that flash. And depending on what you're doing at night, they actually, when you're recording, turn off. Not ideal for night operation. We talked about near all aerodromes again, but talk about like, what's the extended center line, Finn?
So as an aircraft is approaching an airport, they get lined up with the runway. At some airports, it could be several kilometers before the runway. So when we talk in airplanes, we talk about the extended center line, which is you imagine the center line of the runway extending up into the sky, and you line yourself up with that. So
yeah, so the extended line, that imaginary string line that you draw down the center for the approach and the departure side, where planes are taking off or coming into land, that's where you really don't want to be playing with a drone. You don't want to be crossing that line. It's a serious thing even for manned aircraft to be in that area because now you're potentially putting yourself in conflict. So we've touched on this already, but here's the hard nose. Wildfires, Jen. Big no. Big no. Do not fly a drone near wildfires of any kind.
5 nautical miles. So it's 5 nautical miles, 3,000 feet AGL. That's for a point. It will, if the fire becomes a fire of any size, of any noticeable size, they will most likely expand it via NOTAM.
And we'll get into the NOTAM side, but real quick about wildfires specifically. If you're in BC, BC has the fire map. If you're in Alberta, Alberta has a fire map. Pretty much every province has their own wildfire agency. There's a site, I'll put the link or flash it over here, but it's called CIFC, Canadian Interagency Fire Center, I believe, has a map of all fires in Canada. You do not want to be flying near any posted fire because then that NOTAM we're going to be talking about is automatic, 5 nautical miles from the center point or from the perimeter.
Now, if you're flying in the bush in a really remote area and you're the person to discover that fire, obviously,
report it. Yeah. Try and identify it, but don't take your drone off and be like, oh, I'm going to go get pictures of exactly where it is. Because just because you can see it and you want to get a better look, there may be an initial attack helicopter on its way already with a crew on board, or they're going to be bucketing. So their situational awareness is not great to start with because they're now looking at the fire, dealing with 4 different radios going on at the same time. This little drone at 100 knots flying towards you is going to look like a mosquito, and before you know it, it's going to be through your windshield or through your rotor blades.
Yeah, and it's the same color as the smoke. It's the same color as the sky. Like
your flight animals. What are flight animals?
Birds.
I thought they were horses. Right? Like they're easily scared.
Oh.
Yeah.
You also shouldn't fly near birds.
Deer, I guess. Yeah.
So I wrote it as, obviously don't fly it near protected species of birds and or any animals and marine mammals, right? That's got a totally different rule set as well. That doesn't qualify based on micro or big. So you shouldn't fly near marine mammals. It's actually very restrictive and lots of enforcement happening on that side. Flight animals, I was thinking horses, right? So highly valuable. If they spook and break a leg, that's huge damage. So, but yeah, eagle's nests. See lots of footage of that every once in a while. And and typically these kind of animals are going to be in parks. So I'll jump to that real quick. All national parks are banned for drone use for recreational purposes, and you will not get a permit for recreational purposes with a drone in a national park. You may get a permit for commercial use, but there's a lot of circumstances that need to be identified first. So it has to benefit the park. It has to benefit the nature, and it has to promote safe use and respect of the park. It's really difficult, especially if you're doing this for commercial, do not plan on getting it within 30 days. Plan for a very long permitting process because there'll probably be some no's to get past. Provincial parks. It's going to vary. Pretty much everywhere west of Manitoba, I think it's a hard no for provincial parks. Municipal and regional parks, again, it's going to vary. Calgary's got some pretty permissive municipal parks. They actually have drone areas designated that you can fly. Vancouver has some allowances in some areas for public property, but not everywhere. It's not easy to just say you can and can't fly. We have blog posts, and we're going to update them with newer videos of like where I can fly in Vancouver, where I can fly in Toronto, Montreal, Edmonton, all the major cities.
Check your local bylaws, not just the city bylaws, but also the park bylaws specifically. A lot of cities, like I live in a city that has 2 separate sets of bylaws, one for everything and then one for parks specifically. And you can, control F or Command F on a Mac to search in the document. And if you search for drone and come up with nothing, your search is not over. Also search model or model aircraft.
Or powered
aircraft or something like that. Even something like, but the one in the city where I live, it's model aircraft is the thing that you're not allowed to fly. From an actual technical definition, this is not a model of an aircraft. However, a city will consider it a model aircraft.
It is a remotely piloted aircraft, and Transport has used model aircraft and remotely piloted aircraft interchangeably. So we went to go and fly the Avata 2 the other day, and we did a quick search. We were in Pitt Meadows, and what did it say? High velocity activities, including, and then it gave a bunch of things like it listed a bunch of activities that are considered high velocity, and they actually used the word drone when they talked about high velocity. If they've written drone, we decided not to fly there. Disasters, floods, emergency scenarios, right? So a few years back, 2021, we had a major flood in the Fraser Valley. It was a restricted airspace. That goes back to its Class F CYR. There was a NOTAM that was put out that says, no, you cannot fly. There's other things that are going to be more automatic, like police emergencies. I've spoken with a few different news agencies about this. The best rule of thumb is do not cross police lines. And just imagine that they extend vertically up to infinity. So if you've got an area that's been cordoned off, the risk of flying a drone over a police emergency is the police helicopter or an air ambulance might be coming. And if it is coming and you're in the way and they have to turn around, did you just cost someone their life, right? Because they couldn't get evacuated in time. So,
and I think there's something to be said to be respectful as well.
Absolutely.
You don't know what's going on.
Let the agency determine what should and shouldn't be released. It's not your call. So let's talk about NOTAMs a little more in depth, and also Class F restricted. So we talked about there's 2 types of Class F, and of course there's 3. There's Class F CYA on a map, which is advisory airspace. The CYA is usually going to be busy airspace for where training is going on, where aerobatics, hang gliding, other stuff. It's not restricted. It's still Class G rules that apply in that airspace, unless it's overlapping something else. But the other one, the CYR, the restricted airspace, thou shalt not fly, regardless of the size of the drone, micro or otherwise.
Or aircraft. No aircraft can fly in Class F restricted.
That's right. NavDrone is a freely available website and app that you can go and do your cursory site survey. And again, I've ranted about this. Microdrone pilots need to do site surveys. It doesn't matter that it's not a microdrone rule. It still applies. You need to do a site survey. And the only way you're going to know whether you can or can't fly is to use NavDrone. DJI's unlock system doesn't tell you. In the NavDrone viewer, you can go to map.navdrone.ca, and then you can say which geozones would you like to see. You want to turn on microdrone at the bottom on the screen here, and that will show you the permanent Class F restricted airspace as well as temporary Class F restricted airspace, which is spooled up by a NOTAM or a notice to airman. When you look at it on a map, it's going to appear in red when you're looking at it on the microdrone layer. So this is Parliament Hill, Canada's capital. Do not fly any drones near Parliament Hill, regardless of their size. And this is why. So from the ground up to 3,000 feet above mean sea level is CYR number 537. That 537 is the airspace number, which you can then take into the designated airspace handbook to find out more information about it. It's owned by the RCMP, National Police. So if you had to fly, if you had a good reason to fly there, you would have to contact them and justify your reasons and get permission. It is continuous. The name and number, and then the fact that it's up to 3,000 feet. The contact for the owner of the airspace, Parliamentary Police, or PPS, which is the RCMP, but for Parliament. and then it's continuous. That means that it's always on. There is no start or stop. It's not like only on Mondays at 2 o'clock. It's all the time. If you need to know where there is a Class F restricted airspace, use map.navdrone.ca. You don't need an account. You don't need to log in. Just use the tool at minimum to do a cursory site survey. Best practices, like I said, do a site survey. Keep your eyes up as much as you can. Have an awareness and a situational awareness. So any aircraft that you see coming towards you, you should be on the ground when they're getting close, right? What's close?
If they look approximately the same size or even remotely the same size, you're too close.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you're looking up at the sky and a Cessna is the same size as your Mavic, it's probably time for you to bring it down because there's a chance that they're going to come down closer to you. So think about like size of the drone, size of an airplane tire. If they're the same size, yeah, you're probably going to hit. You need to be fit to fly, right? So drugs and alcohol, cannabis, 28 days, 12 hours bottle to throttle, that still applies to micros as well. But it does matter. Do not be under the influence. Be human factors fit to fly. Don't be a nuisance, right? Avoid hovering over people. If the drone fails, it's going to get tangled in someone's hair. That's not going to be good. These will cut. They're still spinning fast enough and they are sharp enough that they can cause lacerations. Privacy laws still apply even to micro drones. What's out there on the market for drones? There are, so DJI really kind of brought the micro drone industry into where it is today. So it started with the Mavic Mini, which is the original. That's actually my first personal DJI drone, was the Mini 1. Still running great. Sits in my car, ready to go all the time because it runs LFP style batteries. So these batteries can store for a very long time and they're great. So that drone cost me like $600, I think it was in 2018 when it came out with the batteries or something like that. It gets okay range. It's got okay flight performance. That shoots at 2.7K at 30 frames a second. You throw an ND filter on it and you run it in like a cine-like profile for color. It looks great. It actually, I could shoot that back to back with the Mini 3 Pro, and with a little bit of trickery in software, you would never know. It's actually still a great drone. I've put on the slides here. There's a bar between, so the Mini SE and the Mini 2 SE are effectively the same drone. They all shoot at 2.7K video. They all essentially have the same camera. The Mini SE and the Mini 2 SE are physically almost the same. They're Mini 2 drone cases, but with Mini 1 electronics. And then they've updated the controller. So they run the newer controller instead of the original black one. This is the original Mini style C2 controller that you would put your phone in the bottom and then you put the controllers on and then it would connect. The updated one, that's the RCN series. So the RCN series has a built-in antenna that slides out and then you clamp your phone up at the top. This is actually a little bit easier to fly with. It was nice because now your hand's not covering your phone. The original doesn't work very well with like modern phones in terms of ergonomics. I had to use an external bracket mount to fit like a plus size phone on it. The battery life was better on these as well. It has a much bigger 18650 size battery. These are more compatible with multiple drones. Like this one works with the Mini 3 all the way to the Mini 2 and even like the Mavic 3 and the Air 2. So more wide compatibility. The Mini 2 and the Mini 4K. So the Mini 4K, I don't think it's available in Canada yet, but it's available in the States, or it was just announced a week or two ago as of, it's May 8th that we're shooting this. The Mini 2 and the Mini 4K are the same drone. They're just rebranded. You won't be able to buy the Mini 2 anymore come soon, I guess, if not already. And the Mini 4K is a newer updated version of the Mini 2. So it's got 100 megabit video support. It shoots 4K video. It doesn't have any optical avoidance. It looks physically the same as the Mini 1. It's going to be the most affordable option, I think, that you can buy. Like they're going to cut the price line for everything else. So in the States, the Mini 4K is $299 US. So probably $340, $350 Canada, maybe a bit more. Mini 3, Mini 3 Pro, and Mini 4 Pro are all unique. Right, so this is a Mini 3 Pro. When you look at the Mini 3 Pro, it's got the big round frog eyes on the top of it. That's the obstacle avoidance system that looks forward. And then on the back, it looks backwards. So this drone will, backwards and forwards, it will avoid. The Mini 3 has fake black holes, but no cameras in it. So it is a lower cost version of the Mini 3 Pro. Slightly less capabilities in the camera, but it's physically the same camera, just slightly feature locked. And then the Mini 4 Pro is actually more or less an overhaul entirely of the drone. It has 360-degree obstacle avoidance, so they've reoriented these cameras so that it can see all around it in an omnidirectional. The batteries are essentially the same, but also slightly different. And then the camera is the new backside illuminated sensor, so it's got way better low light capability, and I believe it has D-Log as well as D-Cinelike, so it's got more capability in video bit rates and gradability. We still recommend the Mini 3 Pro right now as a great buy if you want something that you can do commercial work with, if you want to be able to fly it for fun. It's not just because I'm too cheap to not go out and buy the latest Mini 4 Pro. I still think the Mini 3 Pro is a great option while supplies last. We'll put prices or links in the description below for the specifics of the micro drones that are available through like DJI or Amazon. The Mini 4 Pro is like mid $1,000 Canadian. The Mini 3 Pro is roughly $1,000. Like when I say mid, I mean like $1,500. One thing we don't talk about this is controllers. Always recommend get the Fly More kit, right? When you buy a drone, because these things have a lifespan for not only software updates, they're basically phones, right? These things are flying phones. So the way these things are being marketed and sold and released, like that's why I put the bars on the versions here, like the Mini SE, the Mini 2 SE. This is not in chronological order that these were released. The Mini 3 Pro came out before the Mini 3. The Mini 4K came out well after the Mini 2. It's really confusing timeline-wise because what they're doing is they're marketing to different tiers and different price points. Just like when you buy an iPhone, there's a main version and then there's an S version, although they haven't done that for a little while. There's different price points and there's different feature sets is what they're trying to get at. There is a finite lifespan to one of these drones. So the Mini 1 software updates, this thing's now 2018, I think is when it came out. So it's getting a little long in the tooth. I haven't fired it up in a while, so I should probably check if there's any firmware updates. There probably is, but probably not very recent. What's going to happen at some point is going to become legacy. Doesn't matter as much in the micro drone category, though. We talked about this a few weeks ago. If the Phantom 3 is now a legacy drone, you can't fly it in controlled airspace. Micro drones don't matter. So you're going to have a little bit longer legs on the ability to fly your drone, even if the firmware is out of date. Or if as long as it's the latest version available by the manufacturer, it's not out of date. It's just outdated. Other options that are out there, Autel has the Evo Nano and the Evo Nano Plus. Haven't flown one. Can't really tell you if it's a great option or not. It's a little harder to find Autel stuff in retail. Whereas DJI, like you can go to any retail store pretty much and find a mini drone these days. And then if you're looking for something that is all together and complete as a ready-to-fly drone, iFlight makes a FPV micro Cinewhoop that is under 250 grams with a battery, with the air unit, with the camera and everything built into it. So it's a manual drone. In the chat here, Bernard said the challenge in Canada, as we have discussed before, is that anyone can buy a micro drone at a big box or online and have no way of knowing that there are regulations or what happens when you increase the weight. So yeah, that's basically what we're addressing right now. And hopefully this video will live and serve to inform people out there. Coastal, we have a micro drone dedicated course that goes into more detail than this, specifically about practical. We're going to add more content to make it more drone specific about getting the most from a hardware platform as we update that content. Bernard here, people simply see them as a toy. Yeah, that's the reality of micro drones is they're meant to be an entertainment first. It's an activity, it's a hobby first. But what's happened is these tools or these toys, they are now at the ability where you can run a $10,000 a month revenue business off of a drone that costs less than $1,000. There is no reason why you couldn't run a business off this drone. For parks, it's takeoff or landing. Well, I'm going to disagree and acknowledge what you're saying, Bernard, but for the park thing now, there's been a lot of talk about this, like that don't take off and land within the perimeter of a park. That is the current interpretation that has been written, but the reality of it is transport is moving fast towards having the tools to enforce drone flight over parks as well, especially at the national level. There's the Parks Act. There's a lot of things in place that the best practice is to just not fly over a park.
When those rules were written about and the interpretation of being like, oh, you can't take off and land in the park, drones didn't even exist.
The reality of it is the reason why drones aren't allowed in national parks is it's a national park. You're supposed to be able to go there to get away from city life, to get away from noise, to get away from everything. Thank you so much for joining us on another week of Coastal Drone Live. We've talked about micro drones this week and what you can, can't, and shouldn't do with them. So thanks a lot, everyone, and have a great week. See ya.